Hello, welcome back. Well, it's another podcast. I am talking again about a topic rather than doing design work today. And this will probably be the last one for at least a month because I'll be going back to designing. But we are going to deal with, I haven't done one of these for about 2 years. So it's probably overdue that I talk about kind of news stuff. So it's going to be an interesting process. I am not entirely sure if this is going to be a cup of tea for everybody. I'll put up a poll. Feel free to take part in that poll. Feel free to use the chat and put in your ideas and suggestions and what you think is going to take place. And yeah, we're going to get into this. So grab some food, some drink, make sure you're comfortable, and we'll get into this topic. I suspect I have a lot of information. Like there's a lot to tell you. So yeah, it will take a little while. I will at least cover the main topics so you know what to expect. Anyway, let's get going, shall we? Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler, and today I want to talk about tabletop role-playing games and Dungeons & Dragons. It's not just Dungeons & Dragons, but we're going to do a lot. And we're going to sort of look into the future. I mean, you could say we're looking into the past, and I kind of, a lot of this does feel like we're looking into the past, but we're also looking into the future and what 2026 will hold. And so I thought it would be an interesting process to go through and give you everything, all the future things for 2026 that I know of, and give you some predictions around Dungeons & Dragons, official Dungeons & Dragons, tabletop role-playing games in general, since that is the topic that those are the sorts of topics we deal with on this channel. And that is what I'm going to do today, is I'm going to cover as much of that as possible. That means I'm going to be talking about a lot of different games, not just Dungeons & Dragons, for those of you who are wondering, because it is really about all of that stuff. So this is how I'm going to break it up, and this is the order that I'm going to discuss everything in. I'm going to talk about general tabletop role-playing game community trends for 2026, the sorts of things I'm seeing, behind the lines and publishing, YouTube, all that sort of stuff. So the community in terms of D&D and tabletop role-playing games in general for 2026. That'll be the first topic. The next one, I'm going to talk about all of the new tabletop role-playing games that are supposedly going to be released in 2026. There are many, and I'll talk in detail about some of them, kind of. But mostly I'll just tell you what they are, and then you're going to have to go and do some research and find them. Okay? The next thing, because there are so many, I can't talk about every single one. I will also talk about official Dungeons & Dragons for 2026. There's a lot here. I will, of course, talk about the books that are scheduled for release in 2026 for Dungeons & Dragons. You will be happy about some of it and not so happy about other things. So bear in mind, I will be covering that topic. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the projects that I am personally working on for 2026. And there are a lot. I don't know if I'm going to get them all done, but I'm certainly going to try and get as many done as possible, because that's sort of like there. Time is not on my side. So I've made it clear what I'm going to talk about. We'll start off with the first topic, which is sort of general tabletop role-playing game community trends for 2026. I think that's probably the best topic to start with, because those are the things that I can kind of talk to and give you a lot of information on. Okay? So that is the first one we'll start with. And yes, all those things that you were talking about, I see somebody's already started mentioning something about D&D 6e. I'm going to talk about that. I'll come to that. But you might have to wait, because we're going to have to get through the first topic. Okay, so if you haven't noticed, and some of you may or may not be aware of this, but your small independent publishers of tabletop role-playing games will continue to write, draw, and design game accessories for different tabletop role-playing games. Whether that's supplements or completely new games, that is still going to continue, even though there might be tariffs and freight costs and
price of books are going up, and where do you put it, to have your stuff found on DriveThru RPG, the DM's Guild, itch.io, D&D Beyond, or any other sort of website specifically, where you find that sort of stuff. That'll, of course, be a bit harder to find it because there's so much stuff being produced, and it's not by humans, it's a lot of AI stuff. We'll get to that. They are still going to do this. They're still going to make stuff. People make stuff all the time and get no monetary sort of, they never make their money back. They lose money. It's quite a common thing. It will continue. Artificial intelligence mass-produced books and supplements will continue to flood the DM's Guild or Dungeon Master Guild, DriveThru RPG, and the internet and other websites. You're going to see a lot of this stuff. In fact, some of it will be obvious that it's AI, and some of it will look like it was made by humans. It's going to get that good. There are a lot of people who don't do anything with it, and they just sort of assume the AI will do everything perfectly, and they don't edit it and don't check it. But people are going to make a lot of AI material, okay? So expect a lot more of it. If you had more, a lot last year, expect more. The tabletop role-playing game community will continue to fracture. So now you might say this is the Dungeons and Dragons community fracturing. Really, no, it's not. I think it will certainly affect the Dungeons and Dragons playing community, those who are playing modern D&D or Pathfinder. That will certainly fracture, and they'll feel it. But it's going to fracture right across the board because there are so many different games and everybody is trying something. Like they're giving it a go. And, you could say, well, the problem has always been you have a dungeon master or a game master or somebody wanting to run a game and trying to find players to play that game. The reality is that people playing games are going to have to sort of just play what's available. There's always been a fairly significant market for pay to play, but a lot of people can't pay the money to play the game. So they're kind of dependent on people who are willing to offer their services for free. They might have to play some other games. You can expect this to fracture. It's already started. I don't expect the trend to stop. I also expect that tabletop role-playing game community to become less tolerant of Kickstarters. Kickstarters are a great way of crowdfunding a project that is produced by an independent publisher, but a lot of publishers are not independent, small publishers or indie publishers. They're just publishing companies. Like everybody's using it. It doesn't matter who you are or how big you are, people are using Kickstarters quite often. But I think that the general community and audience who are into this sort of thing are going to become less tolerant of Kickstarters taking a year or more to deliver to their customer. And so if you have not really got your book written and you're waiting to get funded before you start the project, I think you're less likely to get your funding. Just because so many Kickstarters have failed, or failed to produce, or failed to deliver, or people are still waiting 1, 2, 3, 4 years down the track and there's nothing. So the customer base for Kickstarters is probably going to get very, very intolerant. I think that will certainly squish back a kit and Kickstarter. Okay. Now you might say that's partly the fault of Kickstarter and back a kit, but I think it actually comes down to the people making those products. If you haven't mostly written the thing and it's ready to go, don't put it forward. Okay. If you can't get it done, don't put it forward. The number of Kickstarter projects will likely diminish too, as people shift to print-on-demand websites like DriveThru RPG. Even Amazon, you can actually, make your own publication and then have it go up to Amazon as a print-on-demand option. It's a little bit more complicated, but it can be done. And also using specific publishing websites for tabletop role-playing games. A lot of smaller publishers are using their own websites to sell their product from, whether that's the physical copy or the digital copy. So I think that's going to be more likely. So that it also means that, you're not going to get a lot of deliveries from the Kickstarter. What you'll wind up getting is a code that allows you to go to another website to get a print on demand. You might get your PDF through Kickstarter, but you're probably not going to get your print on demand, just because printers are mucking around with their prices. The freight deliverers are mucking around with their prices. The tariffs are all over the place, the taxation on these things. The prices are so unstable, it is too risky to do it completely through Kickstarter or BackerKit. Next, the Kickstarter tabletop role-playing game projects will offer, as I said, PDF and print versions through a print-on-demand website where you get a code. And I know a lot of people don't think that's the case, but that's already started to happen. It's already starting to become a trend. Now, another problem that's been coming up, and it's also related to artificial intelligence, and that is more book publishers for tabletop role-playing games, or indie publishers, or even, frankly, the big publishers who are making books are going to get scammed a lot. It's started to happen already. Roll for Combat, it's happened to Roll for Combat, it's happened to Monolith, it's going to happen to a lot more, where people who are saying they're producing artwork for them that is done by humans, or text material, whether they're creating or generating it, writing it, they're going to use artificial intelligence instead. And they're going to go to great lengths to hide that it is created by artificial intelligence, so they don't actually have to put in the long hours to make it. The profit or the money you make off the word count for text material in a tabletop role-playing game is utterly ridiculous. I don't know why you'd even bother. You'd be better off to go and do a low-paying job, frankly. The only reason to do it is for love, and if you already have a day job, frankly. It's terrible rates, terrible rates. I think MCDM has the best rates in the industry, but only so many people can work for them, and even then it's not that great. So artificial intelligence, artwork, and text material, you're going to see a lot of publishers not knowing that they are putting stuff into their books that is generated by AI, and they thought it was human. That's going to happen a lot of scamming. Another thing that you may or may not be aware of, and that is a game called Morkbork, or Morkbork. I think it's something like that. I do actually have the game. It is going to continue to grow within the community, particularly in Europe. Europe likes their stuff dark, dank, and not fluffy. They like their heavy stuff. I would say small parts of America are also going to probably be more interested in this game, because the reality is that adults prefer the dark, grim nature of Morkbork than they do Pathfinder. Heck, even to a large extent, Shadowdark. Shadowdark is a bit darker in nature, but this is a lot darker. And also Dungeons and Dragons, because Dungeons and Dragons is not punk rock anymore. It's not the cool thing. It's not the thing that you want to hide from your parents because it's got some stuff in it maybe they don't agree with. Whereas this is kind of more in that vein. And adults don't like censorship. They don't like their stuff sanitized. They don't like the childish material. Now, there's always a market for that, and there should be a market for people who are playing it at the younger age. Absolutely. But the reality is, when I was 12 years old, I wanted the punk rock stuff as well. It's just whether my parents would be very happy about me having that sort of thing. And the mainstream vibe of Dungeons and Dragons and other games is kind of a little bit soft for people. So this is why things like Vast, Grim, Pirate Borg are surprisingly popular. They are growing and continuing to grow. Cyborg is another one, sort of a futuristic board game. And then we've got Ragnarborg coming as well. There's many of the board games coming out. They're based off this. They've just got a different vibe and different classes and different bits and pieces to them. So expect a lot more of that. Okay? Will it be a D&D killer? Of course not. But it will pull away a chunk of the market. A small portion, but it will be felt. there is no way to determine the success of the Shadowdark RPG, this game. It's one book. It has all your monsters in it, like over 200. It's the Dungeon Master Guide or Game Master Guide, and it's the Player's Handbook with 4 classes and about 5 ancestries. Now, it doesn't have a lot of options, but I don't think we can actually determine what the level of success of Shadowdark will be. All I know is that it will continue to grow within the community, and I suspect that the Shadowdark community, the people playing this game, is going to grow faster than Pathfinder, and it's going to grow faster than Dungeons and Dragons, the modern version. I honestly think it is very, very likely going to outgrow most things. Now, there is another game that's just recently been released. Now, I don't have that book because I'm in New Zealand, and trying to get hold of that game would be very difficult. Not to mention, I don't really want to play that game, but I have played it. So I haven't gone to the extent of buying the core book because I don't plan to play it again. I've played this type of game before, and you've probably heard of it. I've talked about it recently, Daggerheart RPG. I expect the Daggerheart game that is made by Darrington Press and part of, what Critical Role is doing, I can see them having really good initial growth. In fact, probably outgrowing and outselling most people in the market to begin with. Because essentially Daggerheart is an upgraded version of Fate. And Fate fell out of favor many years ago. It's an older system. And Daggerheart is really Fate. I know people talk about Powered by the Apocalypse, but Powered by the Apocalypse takes a lot of its philosophy and design from Fate as well. So it's kind of funny. I'm playing a Fate game right this very moment with my home group called Bulldogs. It's an older game. I suspect, though, with that initial growth and initial spurt, that as people start playing that game, that a lot of dungeon masters and players playing characters will struggle with the game because they don't have the skill level required to deal with a game like this, and they don't have the correct mindset to deal with it, because Daggerheart is a heavy narrative game and a heavy crunch game. It is part of the reason why I think Fate sort of fell out of favor, because it's just a little bit too much crunch to Fate, but Daggerheart has even more. So you can expect Daggerheart to eat away at the market share for sure. There's another game out, and it's an interesting sort of kettle of fish, and that is Draw Steel. Now, Draw Steel is really, I would say, a tactical RPG or role-playing game by MCDM. It has a few issues to deal with, unfortunately, which might be that people don't actually play the game. Did people support Draw Steel's Kickstarter to punish Hasbro for the open game license drama in 2023? I think a lot of people did, and then put the book on the shelf. So the next Kickstarter will help MCDM determine if they can continue making supplements for Draw Steel as a game, because if they can't, there's no real market. The initial purchase of the core books is usually strong in most tabletop role-playing games, and then it drops off. It's very unusual to have an initial jump and then for growth to increase or continue. It's always a drop-off. There's only weird situations like D&D 5e, about 2 years after its release, the sale of that game increased. That really hasn't been seen before. That's really unusual. I don't expect it to happen again. And I suppose it's possible, but I don't really think it will. Now, there has been talk that the new Kickstarter for MCDM or Draw Steel is funded and that project's going to go forward and that everything is fine. But they've also announced that they're going to make a new game called Crow. And I haven't even put this into my notes because I only heard about it just like an hour ago. So I haven't had time to actually look at what Crow is. I suspect Crow will be a more narrative game rather than a tactical RPG. So that MCDM has a couple of different products for the market. I also expect a wide variety of different tabletop role-playing games to be published in 2026. A significant number, a large number are going to get released. You can see your market getting, like this happens pretty much every year. InWorld has to deal with a lot. But since 2023, I think people have been holding off to see how things will work, what will happen with Dungeons & Dragons 2024. They now know things are going into publication because, you know, things like tariffs were holding them off, shipping was holding them off, price of printing was holding them off. Lots of things were holding up the works. Maybe development cycle, you know, you were hoping that your development cycle was only going to be 9 months, 2 years, 3 years, and it wound up being 5 years. This happens because it takes a long time to test an analog game. So let's talk about the next topic that I was going to discuss, and that is all of the interesting things you can expect coming in the 2026. Like, there's a lot of stuff. So the new tabletop role-playing games for 2026. What will they be? And what do we know about them? Right? Okay, so this is, I'm going to list all of them, and then I'm going to talk about a couple of them. Okay? So this is what apparently is supposed to be coming in 2026. No guarantees because things happen. Surprises occur. Ambria, World Under Starlight, is supposed to be coming out. We've got Assassin's Creed is being talked about. We've got Astro Primer, At the Gates, whatever that is. Bite the Hand, Briark, Broken Empires, Cork Board, which is B-O-R-D, not board as in the pin board. Cosmic Dark, Dark Conspiracy, The Unseen World, The Unseen War, Deathbringer. Deathbringer is not, in my opinion, a completely new system. It is basically just a slight modification of Shadowdark. We have Diablo, of all things. We have Draconym. Now, I think that's D-R-A-K-O-N-Y-M, Draconym. We have Dungeon Crawler Carl. For those of you who are aware of Dungeon Crawler Carl, there's going to be a role-playing game for that. Dungeon Dwellers. Ex Tenebris. Ghost in the Shell Arise. Heroes of Might and Magic, which is very much related to exactly what you think it is, the Magic the Gathering card game. Hollows. Honor Bound. Horus Heresy. You know where that is. That's your Games Workshop sort of Warhammer 40,000 sort of stuff. Hot War. Indominant. Invincible Superhero Role-Playing. Justice League Unlimited. Will I get this right? Kendamona. Yeah, Kendamona Opera. I don't know very much about this. I think it's Japanese or Korean or Asian. I'm not sure. Legends of Akaroth. Is it Akaroth? Akaroth. Legends of Akaroth. Merryshire Detective Club. Mistborn. A few of you have probably come across Mistborn before, and I'm saying Mistborn, you're probably thinking, hang on, isn't Mistborn already out? Apparently something in 2026. Neon City Outlaws. Oathhammer. Outgunned Superheroes. Page Turners. Pale Tides. Pico, the Tiny Bug's Big World. Yes, that's right. Pico, Tiny Bug's Big World. He planted a bug. Pioneer. Procedural. Pumpkin Spice. Yeah, I know what you're thinking. Ragnarborg. Now, I was talking about Morkborg. Ragnarborg is the new board game. Ragnarborg. And it's exactly what you would think. It's North themed, Norwegian themed. Raptor Ruckus, Stone Top, Story Path Ultra, Tales from Elsewhere, Clockworld, The Black Company. It sounds very interesting, that one. Twilight Sword, Valraven, Wandering Blades. So those are the ones that I am aware of. And now let's talk about a few of those where I know a little bit more, that I can tell you about them so you know what to expect. The rest of them will hopefully you've been able to figure out from my accent what the heck I was saying. If there is a game that I mentioned and you weren't completely sure what it is, I totally understand. So what I will do is I will dump into the chat a great huge section of text, sort of listing them off in the text so that you can see the names of them if I pronounce them in a way that was a little bit whack. I don't know if this is going to work. Is it going to work? Okay, so I can only do so many characters and then it's going to stop. So I can do it in chunks. Okay, so I can do up to there. Let me just delete that there. So up to Deathbringer. So that's, I just mentioned all those. And then after Deathbringer, we have to go, where's Deathbringer? That's that one. Then we have to go here. And we'll just do it in a big chunk. And then I'll just do this a couple of times. Small chunks, eh? Copy. And then we'll do the next one from there. So, yes, there are a lot of games. A lot of games. Okay, so we have to go. All right, so we have to take that one out. But we can put that in. And then I believe we had the Invincible Superhero RPG, and then we can drop in about that many, I hope. Copy. So, yes, there are a lot of games that you can expect coming out. So, good times for anybody who likes to try out new games. If you're not really into that, totally understand. Don't worry, you've still got the games that you like playing already, and you can keep playing the games that you like, and that will be fine. Not an issue. Okay, all right, so I need to take that one out. Didn't expect it. I thought I might get away with getting them all in there, but I didn't. And then the last few, which is up to here. Okay, all right. So I think that is everything that I just mentioned in the chat. That is a lot of information. Now, let's talk about some of these in a bit more detail, since now that I've copy and pasted all of that in there. So I'm going to move this back in here and get comfortable. So there is a game that's been rolling around the internet that people have been talking about for a while now, and people have been expecting something will happen. And I didn't mention it, but I will. Thundercats RPG. Who knows what is happening with this new Thundercats RPG? Will it make to the publishers' printers? Honestly, there has been talk that it will, but there's been utter chaos being experienced with the publisher around this game. I don't know if the IP Thundercats as an RPG is going to make it to the market in 2026. Cross your fingers if you were looking for that, and we'll see. I don't have any idea if it's likely, though. But that is another game that people are probably going to be looking for. I know there's a few people who still sort of like Thundercats. I think most people don't even remember what Thundercats is, so, you know, it's during my time. Heck, I think I was a teenager when that was out. I can't remember what year it was, but anyway. Okay, so the first one that I can tell you a little bit more about, okay, is Emboria. Emboria World Under Starlight. So Emboria World Under Starlight is a high adventure fantasy game. It uses a D100 based system, so that's your percentile dice, where players are part of mythology in a dying kingdom. It is being produced by Strange Owl Games, and its current release date is somewhere between March or April of 2026. I would put a big, huge question mark on that. I think it would be expecting a lot for that to be successful. I think there have been a lot of problems with this game. It is entirely possible it might show up later in the year or might not show up at all. But I do know a little bit more about that than the other games. The next one I thought maybe some of you were interested in, that was Assassin's Creed. This involves players fighting a war with the Templars and in the modern day, but also different historical settings. The matching system uses sort of original custom 6-sided dice with 4 different symbols on them. So the symbol for action, a symbol for strength, a symbol for wits, and a symbol for social. And so I don't like games that have specialized dice like this because I usually charge an arm and a leg for them. But it is being produced by Cool Mini, or should I say Cool Mini or not, and the release date is supposed to be between March and April of 2026. Again, this is another game where there have been a lot of problems. I don't know if it's going to actually make it to the marketplace at that time, though. Astro Primer is a solo science fiction space exploration game. It's sort of post-apocalyptic retro universe game. So it's got a mix of stuff going on here. The Astro Primer game mechanics use a hex crawl system that is powered by reference tables that you use and dice rolling to determine what you come across as you hex crawl. So, I mean, you've probably seen these sorts of games before. Gamma World kind of worked like this many years ago. There's lots of games that have done this sort of thing. So, yeah, I suspect this is one of those games where it's not going to require a host as much as some other games, because you can probably generate everything in some sort of procedural process. It is being produced by Crescent Chimera, and the release date is supposed to be early 2026. I've got no idea. It is very sort of up in the air. Again, this is another questionable date for its release where I don't know if we can count on when it's going to happen or if it's going to happen. Hopefully it does. The next one, and I'm only mentioning this game not because I think it is a new system, but because I know that Professor Dungeon Master is popular and a lot of people watch his channel, and it's got marketing and selling points behind it. I have no interest in it myself because what he's saying and what the rules are that he's been talking about don't line up for me. But that is Deathbringer. Deathbringer uses the Shadowdark RPG core rules. I don't think there's anything wrong with making a supplement that works well with Shadowdark core rules, and I'm assuming that Deathbringer will include the core rules from Shadowdark, which isn't very much of the book anyway, so that's fine. And you can probably use that Shadowdark core rule book in conjunction with Deathbringer, I would imagine. It's going to include a few rules modifications or mods. You're probably already aware of them if you've played Shadowdark. So not really a new system, really sort of like an expansion, I would say. It's going to include some prestige classes that allow you to play characters from level 10 to 20. Yes, that's right. Professor Dungeon Master is doing this. And, Kelsey, the designer, has always said that level 10 to 20 is not something that is going to work well with Shadowdark RPG. I think she's right. I think it's probably not going to be a great idea to try to go from level 10 to 20. I've discovered that you can play from level 1 to 10 with Shadowdark, and you're perfectly fine, and you can still include all the things that high level play involve, like owning a business, having a castle, controlling a kingdom. Like those sorts of things can still be done. It's just you don't have 20 levels. It's supposed to also include world building, Deathbringer, and new adventures and stuff. I don't know what that stuff is, but stuff. Now, this is going to be published by Roll for Combat, and the release date is sometime in 2026. I think the reason why there is no specific date in 2026 is because they're still writing it. I don't think it's nailed down. I still think they're working through the process. And remember, I don't think the Professor Dungeon Master is writing all of this stuff himself. I think he's got a lot of people to do the work for him, because he is not he's written some stuff, but he's not really done a lot of writing for games. So I think he's trying to lean on other people who might be able to do that. And he's got a daytime job, and he's trying to look after his health. So it makes perfect sense to me. Okay, next one. Diablo. I thought a few people might want to know a little bit about Diablo, the fantasy tabletop role-playing game. It is based on the Blizzard's entertainment video game and its fame. The game mechanics will be a dice pull system. There's lots of dice pull systems out there, so I don't know much more than that. It is being published by Glass Cannon Unplugged, and its release date is sometime in 2026. I've got a question mark here because I think the likelihood of seeing Diablo released in 2026 is up in the air. I think we really will not know. There's a lot of these games where it's going to be hard to know if they're going to make it. So that's Diablo. Next is Dungeon Crawler Carl, based off the Lit RPG book series that promises a brutal and funny world to explore. So for those of you who don't know, it's pretty brutal, Dungeon Crawler Carl. It's quite amusing. Death is a thing. There's no specific type of game mechanics that have been mentioned for this game system. It is being made by Renegade Game Studios, which has been around for a while, but we'll see how they go. I'm kind of curious if Renegade is actually going to survive. I know there's a few publishers that are dying, and we're kind of hearing about the extent of their destruction in little bits and pieces. The release date is supposed to be 2026 sometime. Again, I don't know if that's going to make it out. I can see there being a market for it because, Lit RPG is really popular, and Dungeon Crawler Carl is something that people like reading. So I can imagine a lot of people might want to play that game. The next one I want to talk about, is Justice League Unlimited. Will let players take on the role of iconic DC superheroes and fight villains. That's the whole purpose of that game. The game system will be a D20 based narrative engine. So you're using a narrative engine, which means there are less rules, I hope, but using a D20 to resolve stuff. And it's supposed to be getting published by Cataris, releasing sometime in 2026, don't know when. Again, I question whether they'll make their release date for that, like a lot of these games. Like, it's really hard for some of these publishers to get things out on time because there's so many surprises that occur. So those are the things that I sort of picked up. There are so many more games out there that I could talk more about if I had the time to do all the research, but I don't. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to drink some water, and I'm going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 2026 and a lot of the official stuff that's going to be taking place, being released, and all the news related to that. And unfortunately, it's gotten complicated and quite large. So if you were hanging out for the last 40 minutes just to hear about the D&D stuff, here it is. Just recently, it hasn't happened that long ago. It's literally just been like a day or two, I think. James Hayek has joined the Wizards of the Coast team as a senior designer. Now, you might be unaware that there aren't too many senior designers left over at Wizards of the Coast. And James Hayek has been around a while. He's still quite young. He's been working on the stuff for years, but he's not the old school designer. He is the newer school designer. But I wouldn't expect anything revolutionary from James. This guy has done pretty much what everybody else does. That doesn't mean that he hasn't done some good work. He has won some, I believe he's won an award from the ENnie Awards for some of his work. James is a freelance writer who's worked on projects for Geek and Sundry quite a few years ago. Insider magazine, so that's sort of the in-world magazine that they had. I think that's right. He's worked for Cobalt Press. He's worked as the lead writer for articles for D&D Beyond. He's done projects for Wizards of the Coast before. He's worked for Critical Role's Darrington Press. He's worked for Ghostfire Games. Now, the Dungeons & Dragons products that James is known for, because he's credited in them, sometimes he might have worked on projects and not been credited, but these he has actually had either lead design work, he's the lead designer, or he's a co-creator or contributor. Okay, so James has done things like Call of the Netherdeep, Waterdeep Dragon Heist, for those of you who are aware of that one, Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus, Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, which is of course the Critical Role book, and then he's also done Critical Role Tal'Dorei campaign setting and the Tal'Dorei Reborn as well. So he's done a few things. He's done a lot of setting books. He hasn't ever really done a system. I would imagine that the reason for hiring him as a lead designer is because they intend to start work or are already working on some sort of RPG, which means design work for a system. And you're thinking, hang on, didn't we just get 2024 D&D? Yeah, but you got to remember it takes years to design the next version of a game. So I would imagine that even if they hire him now, they've probably already had things going on. I would expect he's been hired not just to do supplements, but also to help design the next version of Dungeons and Dragons. And that could be years down the track. I know a few people are thinking, it's this year, 2026. I think that's unlikely, but we'll talk about that. You can expect Wizards of the Coast will make more very disappointing Dungeons and Dragons books. And I say this with tongue-in-cheek, but knowing fully well what is on the schedule so far. They haven't actually officially said very much, but this is what I know in terms of official Dungeons and Dragons books that have been licensed and are on the cards. The first one is going to be Dragonlance Legends Collector's Edition. So this is reprinting the Dragonlance Legends trilogy from back in 1985 with behind-the-scenes information and material. So it's basically the novels, and the expected date for its release is the 10th of February 2026. I expect that date to be fulfilled. I don't think it's going to be late. I think that's in the can. Okay, so basically a collection of novels from Dragonlance. The next one is the Dungeons and Dragons Crochet, a book of many patterns. So this includes 20 new crochet patterns for an owlbear plushies, bag of holding as examples. There's probably going to be other things, but those are the things that I'm aware of that are supposed to be in this. So if you like crochet and you like D&D and you want to make crochet D&D stuff, this is the book for you. Okay, 31st of March 2026. I expect this is also in the can. I think you can guarantee this will be released on time. Okay. Usually D&D official stuff does not give you a release date unless they know for sure they can deliver. The next two are probably potentially the most interesting and also potentially the most disastrous of the releases for the year that we know of so far, and that is the Dungeons and Dragons Players Workbook of Epic Adventures. It's licensed. It's made by Penguin Books. It is not actually a Wizards of the Coast thing. A lot of the stuff is licensed. It's not actually Wizards of the Coast making it. Okay, an interactive companion book to the 2024 Player's Handbook, with a walkthrough for making a character. Okay, so if you have the Player's Handbook for 2024 and you're having trouble working your way through that system, and D&D Beyond is not working for you, and you need to be able to sort of sit down with pen and paper and work through that, this interactive companion book is supposed to help you do that. The release date is the 5th of May 2026. Okay. The next one is the Dungeons and Dragons Dungeon Masters Workbook of World Building. So this is a detailed companion book to the 2024 Dungeon Master Guide. Okay, to help make a companion. It gives you specialized exercises. It goes over map making, role playing, and improvising. So exercises and advice and guidelines around doing that sort of thing. So it's supposed to be a more practical guide than the Dungeon Master Guide for 2024. It would be frightening to think that that would be possible. Again, the release date for this is a Penguin book is the 5th of May 2026. Okay, now you're probably thinking, well, that's all very well. These don't sound like they are official Dungeons and Dragons, Wizards of the Coast, tabletop role-playing game stuff. Like, where's that? This is what I know. I suspect we'll get a new Ravenloft supplement from Wizards of the Coast. Yes, we've already had a Ravenloft supplement. We had a setting book. Why do we need another one? It's because they sell. They'll be doing it because it sells. Because recently they released an Unearthed Arcana, which had horror-themed subclasses. And also, good old Ed Greenwood accidentally said that there was going to be a new Ravenloft book coming soon. He had mentioned that we were going to be getting Faerun, Forgotten Realms, which we got at the end of 2025. And there was also an Eberron book released as well in the end of 2025. So now we're looking at a Ravenloft book probably coming out. I don't know when, but probably this year, more than likely, based off what Ed has said and the fact that the Unearthed Arcana was dropped a while back. And I imagine their design cycle sort of starts and ends after about 9 months before they publish, something like that. So I would imagine near the end of the year we'll see a Ravenloft supplement. Maybe sooner, who knows. Okay, let's start talking about some of the other things that people have heard floating through the internet. And that is, official Dungeons and Dragons is going to lose more of the market share to the following games. You can be guaranteed that official Dungeons and Dragons, whether that's the 2014 version or the 2024 version, Pathfinder 2E is going to pick up, and the remastered is up part of the market share. It's just a fact. It's going to happen. Daggerheart is going to bite into their market. Absolutely, you can expect Shadowdark to pick up some of their market. You can expect the likes of Morkborg and other Morkborg projects or products, like Pirate Borg in particular, to pick up more of the market. They're going to chomp away at the sides there. And also, yes, older versions of Dungeons and Dragons. I think Basic is probably going to have the biggest impact, but also the OSR, old school, Renaissance, old school revival, revolution, whatever you want to call it. I think a lot of that is also going to eat into the market. And also maybe Cosmere. I haven't really seen much in the way of Cosmere here in New Zealand, but I think Cosmere could have an impact just because there's such a huge popular fan base, and I can see that those people who like playing or like the books, the novels, engaging with a tabletop role-playing game, as long as Cosmere has got the right bits and pieces to it. So I can see there being a bit of a market. I don't know if that is just going to spike and then disappear, or whether it'll start at all, but I think it's possible. That's a maybe. And then Draw Steel is also a maybe. I don't know if that is going to chomp into the market. I think Cosmere and Draw Steel probably going to have a very small effect on the market for tabletop role-playing games in general. Call of Cthulhu is, again, been a steady sort of tabletop role-playing game that has eaten into the market, and that might also sort of have an impact. Okay. There's been a lot of talk about the fact that Netflix has Stranger Things. So official Dungeons & Dragons, the tabletop role-playing game, will not experience a surge in popularity, unfortunately, because of Season 5 of the Netflix series Stranger Things. It's just, we're not going to see that spike. That trend is played out. You're coming to the end of it, and some people loved the ending of Stranger Things Season 5. Some people have not. I think the problem is it's the transition from Stranger Things to playing official modern Dungeons & Dragons, or even advanced Dungeons & Dragons, or even 3.5 or 4E, 5E, AD&D, first, second, is way too hard. And so I just don't see that modern official Dungeons & Dragons is going to benefit very much by the Stranger Things TV series, because it is the end. And yes, Stranger Things is essentially a Dungeons & Dragons story, if you ask me, but I don't think it's going to help them, just because people might jump on, but they're going to jump off straight away because it's so complicated, so hard to deal with. Yeah. Critical Role. Let's talk about Critical Role in D&D games. Critical Role recording D&D games will not encourage fans of actual plays to go and purchase official Dungeons & Dragons. It has certainly done that in the past. It may have a tiny effect, but I think the problem is that it's unlikely to drive them towards official Dungeons & Dragons products. I think the Critical Role fan base who likes watching the recorded actual plays by that team are not interested in official Dungeons & Dragons that much. I think they're much more likely to go and pick up the Darrington Press supplements or third-party published books rather than official D&D. So, yeah, good for Darrington Press, not so great for official D&D. I'm not too worried about it. Like, I couldn't care less about that. But anyway, I expect more new Dungeons & Dragons 5e clones, or at least D&D clones, that present better game rules and systems in 2026. I think we're going to still see people making D&D clones, whether it's the old version, the newer version. People are going to still keep spitting that sort of stuff out, so we can see the market sort of expanding that. Many more third-party products for Dungeons & Dragons 2024 or 5.5. I don't know that will necessarily equate to good sales, but we'll see. And of course, the good products, the good third-party products that Wizards of the Coast can think they can make some money off and can convince people to put it onto D&D Beyond, will wind up on that website for people to use. That's going to probably continue. They're certainly trying to turn it into a hub for the more official D&D products, the things that seem to sell well. Okay, somebody had mentioned it earlier, and that is there have been whispers and rumors of a Dungeons & Dragons 6e, a new version of D&D that isn't 2014, 2024, isn't 5.5 or 5.75 or whatever the heck you want to call it, that essentially we're going to see a new Dungeons & Dragons 6e being released in 2026 or maybe 2027. I think this would be ridiculous. I also think it would be a disaster. I also think that it has no legitimacy. The cycle for creating a new edition is quite a long one. Even if you don't play test everything properly, which Wizard of the Coast has done for 5e and various versions of their game more than a few times. Like, it's not like they're not used to not play testing stuff properly. They do it all the time, okay? But I think just the development cycle and getting things all together, I think 2026 is too soon, even 2027. So I do not think we're going to see a new D&D 6e. But what I do think is that the cycle has started, probably the design cycle has probably already started for Dungeons & Dragons 6e. It will stay hidden behind closed doors, and it may have already started before 2026. More than likely, they've already started that process as soon as they dropped the 2024 game. They probably already started that process. Right, we need to start working on the next version of the game, because remember, it's been over 10 years since 5e was released. The cycle of games tends to be, anywhere between 5 and 10 years. D&D has followed that pattern. I expect that to happen again. I think you can expect that for sure. So, no, I don't think we're going to see D&D 6e in 2026 or 2027. But yes, it is probably in development, and they've probably started that process already, for those of you who are wondering. Okay, now let's get into the weird stuff. The things that I think are more wishful thinking than anything else, and that is, there have been rumours that the individual Luke Gygax, the son of Gary Gygax, who has retired from the military, so he's got a lot more time and is now sort of publishing tabletop role-playing game stuff, might be involved with designing or re-releasing an older D&D product. I think some people have even suggested that Luke Gygax might be involved in the development of the next version of Dungeons & Dragons, but I doubt that's the case. Not unless it falls in line with what Luke would want to do. And Luke is very much of the old school. Now, he has played more than one version of Dungeons & Dragons. He has played all the versions of D&D, but his preferred version of Dungeons & Dragons has always been basic, not Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, not AD&D 1E or 2E. Those were published to simply get rid of Dave Arneson from getting any money. He's always played basic BECMI BX D&D. So my guess is it's not true, or that Luke has been asked to clean up the basic Dungeons & Dragons game, basically your rule cyclopedia, and re-release the game, because he still plays basic D&D. Like, Luke has mentioned more than a few times that he likes basic D&D. He plays that more than anything else. That is his preferred game. So I've always been of the opinion that Wizards of the Coast would be smart to re-release all their versions of D&D, because they would all sell very well. There are a lot of people playing every version of the game, even 4E now. So I could see them selling those pretty well. And basic D&D sells better than all of them older versions of D&D. So you could sell that easy. Now, if you were to clean it up a little bit, here's the problem is, I don't think Luke Gygax would allow too much to change in the rule system. I'm not entirely sure about that, but I think he would probably want it to stay fairly close to what it is, just to avoid annoying people. And one of the things you've got to realize is that Luke is got a big following in the OSR community. Like he is the guy. A lot of people respect him a lot. Luke has also mentioned that he's got a secret project he can't talk about. And this might be that project. But there's no real evidence, like photos or anybody spilling their beans to say this is very much rumour mill speculation stuff. But if Wizards of the Coast was smart, they would re-release basic D&D, and getting Luke involved would probably be smart. The reason being is Luke Gygax has a very good relationship with the older D&D community, but also the newer players playing OSR, the newer community, the younger people playing the older game or older style of game. And it would be a great image to promote for Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast's reputation is pretty bad right now, and so having Luke involved would probably lift it up and give it some legitimacy. So I can see that being a thing, potentially. It would probably benefit Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro more than Luke, but it's possible. Very much speculation and rumour, though. Also here, something that I think I've seen people going on about, and there was promises of this happening. So Wizards of the Coast or Hasbro will not release the older versions of Dungeons & Dragons, like original D&D, basic D&D, advanced Dungeons & Dragons, first or second. They're not, or even Dungeons & Dragons 4e. They're not going to release it into the Creative Commons or into some sort of open game license in 2026. It's not going to happen in 2026. It's never going to happen. As far as they're concerned, they did that for 5e and essentially 5.5. They're not going to do it for the older versions of the game. You can be guaranteed that it'll never happen. And I think most people have even forgotten that they promised to do that in the first place. And the people who said they would do that are not employed by Hasbro or Wizards of the Coast anymore. They're gone. Out the door. The other thing that I think I've seen people talking about and speculating on, and probably it's wishing that it would be the case, and that is, I think it's unrealistic to believe that Elon Musk or anyone else is ever going to buy Dungeons & Dragons, the brand, or Wizards of the Coast. You just forget that, okay? It is not going to happen. The Dungeons & Dragons brand name is not that valuable. It is not a hugely valuable brand to have. It doesn't make that much money, and the cost that they would associate with selling it to somebody, it's not going to happen. It's basically worth nothing. Why? Because of the open game license, because of the Creative Commons. Just planting the word D&D on something, you could say, well, okay, just having the D&D icon is a selling point. It's not enough to warrant buying that thing. Hasbro will not sell D&D or any intellectual property unless they are forced into liquidation, which isn't going to happen anytime soon, by a court. Unless they are forced to sell everything that they own, Hasbro will not sell Wizards of the Coast or any other thing. All Hasbro does is collect intellectual property or IP and figure out how to make money off it. And then when they can't make money off it, they shelve it for about 10 years and they pull it out again later on. And when the whatever they've got looks like it might go into the public domain, they go to the government and they try to get them to change the law around public domain and copyright and extend that time frame, just like Disney has. Disney's done that with the government in the States. But the States, of course, is not the only government around the world you need to concern yourself, because, you know, the law around public domain is different in every country around the world. But the biggest market for D&D is the North American market. Okay, next. I suspect that Wizards of the Coast's leadership will make an announcement about Grok or ChatGPT using some sort of language model or AI that is trained on all of their official Dungeons and Dragons products. That's all of their supplements, all of their adventures, all of their setting books, all of their rule systems that customers then can use to generate their own stuff and make that available, probably either through D&D Beyond or an auxiliary website that is connected by some sort of linking method to D&D Beyond. I think that that is a thing that the leadership of Wizards of the Coast has talked about, and I think that that's exactly what they're going to do. And it's probably, the training process has probably already started. I would imagine we'll get that announcement sometime this year. Not hugely surprising, that sort of stuff, but yeah, there we go. Okay, so that is all of the things that I have in terms of news. And the next thing is I want to talk about my projects, my personal projects for 2026. But before I do that, let's go through the chat and just address who is still here and listening after an hour. Anything that you might have said or any questions you have. Hello, Chris. Chris Allen, how are you doing? So yes, I talked about D&D 6e, so I've covered that. Prepare, Cook and Survive. How's it going? How are you? So Chris, if you're still here, I'm going to talk about my own projects, which are many. I've talked about what I think is likely to happen with Morkbork. Hello. So Fred Hubert is a patron and a moderator. What have you got here? 6e is just a rumour right now, but 5e 2024 was just a rumour for a long time. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I look, the cycle will have started. I've talked about that already. So Prepare, Cook and Survive is interested in Broken Empires. Fair enough. Good. Thunder Cats Howl. Yes, yeah. So obviously, yeah, Stuart remembers it. Yeah, a lot of nostalgia. Doc Flamingo, hello, how are you? So you're looking at Broken Empires, Raptor Ruckus, and Twilight Sword. Okay. Calrel, it's been a while. Hello, how are you? There are still a whole lot of old content to mine for ideas that you can, yeah, absolutely. Converting old stuff is pretty easy. The Book of Villains to 1994. Yep. You like the villains idea? Sorry about that. OSE, DCC do interest me, especially doing a funnel. I think the problem with DCC is the tables for spells. I think there is definitely a portion of our community that like playing that game. I just think that one of the turn-offs is also the tables. Castles and Crusades, I haven't talked very much about it. I don't know very much about it. I do actually have the books, by the way. I have the new ones. You still here? Okay, so let's talk about my projects. The things that I am planning to do. And I have a lot of projects that were supposed to happen last year. Some have actually already happened. So my D&D, my 2024 projects. Now, my projects are a mix of things. I will be publishing a lot more Shadowdark RPG expansion stuff. So that is going to be classes, ancestries. I'll be doing monsters. I have adventures in development, but I'm not pushing them forward into and focusing on them quite as much. But a lot of Shadowdark RPG stuff is coming from me. And some new stuff has already just been released a couple of days ago, as it happens. And I probably should give you a link to that, which I will. And then we also have what is essentially Dungeons and Dragons 5.5 supplements. So I'm going to be doing a lot of Dungeons and Dragons 5e or 5.5 supplements this year as well. This is very important to me because I feel like that part of the community is not being served very well. And I wound up going down a route or a pathway that led to significant design issues and problems with my level of skill and the god-awful mess that is D&D 5e or 5.5 with their backgrounds, their species, and their classes. And I'll talk more about the problems I encountered with them as we go. You'll see it in the coming months. And certainly you're going to start seeing it like next week for sure. But I'm also going to be making a lot of general system agnostic tabletop role-playing game resources, because I know there are a lot of people playing different games and they need tools to help them do stuff. Some people can just do it all themselves. Some people are just using ChatGPT or AI to generate their bits and pieces. Some people like to know how to make their own stuff and they need some guidance or some tools that are fairly significant. And so that is also a big thing for me. So I have a lot of play testing to do for Shadowdark RPG this year, and a lot of play testing for Dungeons and Dragons 5.5 this year. I'm probably going to do the vast majority of the play testing for Shadowdark RPG this year myself. The D&D 5.5 playtesting stuff will probably wind up getting pushed on to somebody else because I just won't have time. I haven't mentioned it, but I'm also continuing to do playtesting for Super Atomic, the RPG, which is made by AJ Pickett, which has had some problems recently. And because of those problems and it had been taken off the marketplace on DriveThru RPG, we've decided to go and see if there are some things we have left out that need to be sorted out. I'm dealing more with the mechanical side of things for that game and how it plays, so the playtesting aspect, whereas AJ is doing the design stuff, and I think he was talking about aliens and doing an aliens table. But he's also doing Atomic Fantasy. I don't think I'll be doing any playtesting for Atomic Fantasy this year, but I will be continuing to do quite a bit of Super Atomic RPG playtesting. Okay, so there are some things that are coming out this year, and as I said, a book has already been released that you can access for Shadowdark, and I think I should do this the easy way, as just find you the link for the first one, then find you the link for the second one, and talk a little bit about like what are those things going to look like moving forward. So I was aware when Shadowdark came out that there weren't a lot of options there, and so it would be nice to give people more stuff. And so I have, in 2025, been doing a lot of that sort of work already. But I continued that process, and then I decided to find somebody I could work with that I got along with and I could profit share with. So the first one that was released early last year, you might be aware, is called the Player's Expansion for Shadowdark RPG. Okay? It's currently a copper bestseller. It's pay what you want, so that means you can get it for free, but you can pay some money, which would be nice because then I get paid and the other 4 other people involved in that project get paid as well. I've put a link into that right now for those of you who are interested. But there is also a new book that I have recently got published as a result of a lot of work. Some of you have probably seen me going through the process of doing this, and it is basically the second book in that I've made a follow-up to that book. The first one had 10 ancestries and 17, 10 classes and 17 ancestries. So the first one, I decided to give you the barbarian, the bard, the commander, the druid, the monk, the paladin, the ranger, the shaman, the sorcerer, and the warlock as classes, because they weren't covered in core Shadowdark, right? And then ancestries, the Aven, the Atlantean, the bugbear, centaur, changeling, construct, Dragon Blood, which is Dragonborn, Fairy, Fiendish, Furbolg, Gnome, Kobold, Minotaur, Ooze, Saurian, Troll, and Turtleoid. But we decided not to stop there, and that we should also consider looking at other options and going a bit further. And I wasn't sure it could be done, but apparently it can. And so we've put out a second book. And the second book is called the Player's Expansion to Shadowdark RPG. I did the cover artwork. It is not AI. It looks like I did it too. It doesn't look hugely professional because I really fucking hate drawing, but I can. And so it is also pay what you want, right? You don't have to pay anything for it. You could have it for free. Try it out. If you like it, great. If you don't worry about it. But that is now out and available to you, and I'll put in a link for that as well. Okay. Why am I producing so much stuff that is pay what you want? There is a rationale behind this. One, because I haven't play tested everything thoroughly. So I want people to muck around with it and try it out so that I can knock the kinks out of it. It's going to take a while to do that. So what I did with the Player's Expansion 2 for Shadowdark RPG, and I'll talk more about this, is I made a Cursed Blade. The Cursed Blade is basically the subclass, the Hex Blade, but I think better. I created the Elemental Warrior, which is basically the 5 Elements Monk subclass, which isn't that great. I think my Elemental Warrior is far superior. I created the Monster Slayer, which is basically just a subclass, and basically the Monster Slayer in 5e is like a class in every publisher under the sun. They either call it Monster Slayer or Monster Hunter. So I made one for Shadowdark, okay? The Mystical Archer class is basically the Arcane Archer, but I also think this is probably better. And then I created the Psychic Infiltrator, which is your Soul Blade, which is a god-awful subclass. I think the Psychic Infiltrator is a lot better too. I created a Samurai because one of my players wanted to play a Samurai class, so there's a Samurai there. The Shadow Stalker is the Gloom Stalker, which is a bloody overpowered class. I made the Shadow Stalker its own thing. And then we have the Spell Sword. The Spell Sword is basically your Battle Mage or War Mage subclass. The Spell Sword, I won't talk about all the bits and pieces around that because, frankly, there isn't time. There's too much. I did the Swashbuckler. It's a subclass. It's been around a while. I finally figured out what to do with Shadowdark in terms of a Swashbuckler. It wasn't easy, but I got there. The Spell Sword is actually the Blade Singer subclass, but a bit better defined, and I think works a little bit better too. We also have a War Mage class, and we have a War Master, which is like Battle Master subclass. Okay, kind of like that. But they are all built around the philosophy and design aspects of Shadowdark rather than Dungeons & Dragons 5e. So they're significantly simpler. They're intended to be that way for a lot of reasons. Now, I did the classes, but there are 16 ancestries that Wally DM did. And he's made an alien. He's made a cactoid, which is basically a cactus-like playable species, ancestry, should I say. Catfolk, you know what that is. That's Tabaxi, right? Catfolk. Celestial, I guess that is Azamar, yeah. There's a Chlorophoid, which is basically a plant creature that you can play. There's a half siren. Yes, exactly. It's not a full siren, half siren. I know the word half is not commonly liked as a thing to include, but we didn't want to call it siren because we thought like maybe that was leaning too far into the monster. There is a Gorgon. Yes, I believe it or not, there is a Gorgon, as in the mythical Gorgon. Bear in mind, that might get a lot of changes. There is a Jalarian, which is basically like a jellyfish humanoid playable ancestry. There is a Kanjiro, which is like a kangaroo-like humanoid playable option. There's a leprechaun you can play. There's a living statue. There's a lichen. It's not a full-blown werewolf, okay, or lycanthrope. It's a lichen. It's a different thing. There's a Mantian, is basically sort of like a Thycrene insectoid sort of option, or praying mantis, should I say, more like that, I guess. There's a shapeshifter. There's a Triqueal, and there's an undead. So you can actually play as undead as well. I recommend Game Masters, Dungeon Masters, don't use everything. Pick and select. You don't need to use all of that. That is just there. Okay? All right. So some of the other things that are happening, which are probably far more exciting. So if you want to go and get the Players expansion for Shadowdark RPG or the Players expansion 2 for Shadowdark RPG, you can now, because they're available for pay what you want on DriveThru RPG. That's right. Now, coming up, and this is probably my next project that will get published. I've written most of it. I just need to pull it all together. I expect it to take a couple of months for me and Wally to do so, because I'll be profit sharing again with Wally DM. We haven't been paid for any of this stuff. Like, we don't get paid unless it makes money. It's as simple as that. So it's going to be called probably going to be called either the Homebrew Monster Builder or the Homebrew Monster Creator. It will be a system agnostic tool for making monsters, but it will also have the tools in there to help you build stat blocks for Shadowdark RPG and Dungeons and Dragons 5e or 5.5. That will not be pay what you want. That will definitely be a pay product. It will have interior art and a cover, and they're going to have to be a price on that one. I expect it to be a very useful tool, frankly. No matter who you are, it will probably give you most of the stuff you need, particularly around the fluff and the lore of the monsters you are creating, and help you do your own stuff. It is my attempt to get you to make your own stuff rather than buying somebody else's stuff. Okay, so that is coming. I would imagine, as I said, a couple of months from now, once I get all the material together and we decide if there's any holes that I need to fill up, which I think there's at least 2. But I'll solve those holes, don't you worry. We'll get that sorted. And then this is really important to me, and this is a project that will come out this year. I expect it'll take me 3 or 4 months from now to get this to a point where it can be published and make it made available. And that is the Dungeons & Dragons 5.5 or 5e stuff. And that is remastered backgrounds for Dungeons & Dragons 5.5. Okay? It will include custom backgrounds, so you can make your own background that doesn't suck like the shit that is in the 2024. Like attaching ability score increases and feats to backgrounds. It's not my favorite way of tackling backgrounds, because backgrounds are now sort of like an optimization factor. I don't think that's a good idea. I'm going to provide you with a lot of samples. I'm going to look at a lot of the very popular and often used backgrounds that have been stipulated, and I'm going to restructure them. I've been doing a lot of that. I think I've got 6 more to do, and then we should be able to bring that forward. But it'll give you the tools to allow you to make your own and be very clear about how to do that. Now, the 2024 Dungeon Master Guide does have guidance, and I think even the Player's Handbook has guidance on how to make your own backgrounds. But this is, I think, going to be far superior than that. Now, that remastered backgrounds for D&D 5.5 is going to be pay what you want. Why am I doing that? Because I want you to be able to use it. Once I'm satisfied that everything is working the way it is, it will go into a different book later on, and that won't be pay what you want. But there will be a document that is just remastered backgrounds for D&D 5.5, and that will be pay what you want. But you just need to wait 3 or 4 months for it. The next one, and I need to get onto this as well, I have actually done a lot of the work. I realized I've done about half the work already. and that is remastered species for Dungeons and Dragons 5.5 or 5e. Now, I've already done, as I said, many of the specific samples or species that you already tend to use. I've already done a lot of that work. I've still got about half the work to do, so that might take a little bit of time, so bear with me. But I decided I also needed to include custom rules and guidelines for allowing you to make your own species, because that's not in the Dungeon Master Guide for 2024. So that was a difficult process. I didn't think I could do it. Once I figured out what the problem was with the species as they are currently structured, and I'll talk more about that problem later. These projects are all in conjunction with Wally DM, if you're wondering, okay? I'm going to give you probably at least 30 sample species that you can use and the rules for making your custom species as well in that document. Pay what you want as well, because again, it won't be play tested to a level where I'm satisfied, and I want you to get hold of it and use it. I don't want there to be a paywall between it and you. And then once it's all I'm satisfied with it, then it will go to a different product for publication. It won't be pay what you want. But initially, the first one will be, okay? And I will include updates on it over time as well, okay? The next one is a huge one. This is very, very difficult, because although I had said that I really didn't know how I was going to write up how to make custom species for D&D 5.5 or 5e, I ran into the problem of I decided I would remaster the classes for Dungeons & Dragons 5.5 or 5e as well. And I wanted that to be a pay what you want as well, where it could be free or you could pay some money for it. And so I looked at 12 core classes. And again, I expect I will probably be able to release that sometime near the end of 2026. I've done a lot of the work, but there's still a lot more work to go. And I had to solve many problems. So I had to solve the problem of subclasses, multi-classing. I had to solve the problem of a lot of class features were getting shoehorned into backgrounds or into species where they should have been in the class section. And then Wally had said to me, Fred, 12 classes, what about the Artificer? I can't fix the Artificer. The Artificer is unredeemable as far as I can tell. So it can't be fixed as far as I'm concerned. But Wally DM had said to me, can you make rules to allow people to make custom classes? Not subclasses, but the full-blown class. And I said, well, if I am ditching multi-classing and subclassing for a better system, I still don't know if I could do that. Well, on the weekend, I figured out how to do it. I don't think I've written down everything that I need to include in it, but I figured out how to structure it. It just came to me. I don't know. I had one of those days where it was really hot. I'd been on the toilet, had some food, worked out, was feeling good about it, looked at it, thought, I wonder if it can be done. And I just sat down and I just started typing and moving things around and shuffling, and I was like, oh, fuck, it can. So you're going to get custom class building for 5.5 or 5e Dungeons & Dragons as part of the remastered classes. Pay what you want, sometime near the end of the year. It's going to take a little bit longer. Again, it will not be play tested, so that's why it's going to be pay what you want. Again, Wally DM will be profit sharing with me. Okay. Another project, and you may be aware that I've been working on this for a while, and that is a Shadowdark monster book or monster manual. I talked with AJ Pickett for some time about doing a monster book with him. And I said, let's do 100 monsters. And I initially said, let's do 400 monsters. And then Wally DM chimed in and said, don't be stupid. It would be impossible because we don't do this full time and it would take too long and too expensive. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. So 100 monsters. I've done about 60 of the stat blocks, which means there needs to be lore for that. Well, AJ Pickett is going to cover the lore for those monsters. And it will be for Shadowdark, not for 5e. Because when I said 5e to AJ Pickett, he said, God help me, no. And I said, okay, cool. I'll do Shadowdark. I'm fine with that. So I think I've got another 40 to do, and then we'll be there. AJ Pickett is going to do all of the art himself, and there's going to be some original design as well. So I'm going to include a lot of the monsters that aren't already in the core Shadowdark book that you might be wanting to use. I'm going to have to rename them because they'll be IP monsters. Wally DM will do the layout. I would expect you might get the book near the end of this year, near the end of 2026, because it's going to take, AJ's got to draw 100 pieces of art. That's a lot. Whereas I have only got to design 40 stat blocks and then make sure the lore is there. I'm not worried about the lore. It's about taking AJ's 4 to 10 page write-ups on monsters and condensing it down to fit into a book like this. That's the big problem. So that's probably going to be happening near the end of the year. Another project which will probably happen this year because most of it is written. It just needs to be pulled together and organized. And, by the way, the Shadowdark book will not be pay what you want. It will be a paid thing because AJ will have had to do a lot of work to do it, and so will I. So that will be a paid product. Okay. But, I'm sure we'll figure out how to... I'm sure I will figure out how to convince them to how to do can we release a pay what you want version where there's no art and just the monster stat blocks. That might wind up being a thing as well. You never know. I'm not going to promise it though, because that's really working with AJ and Wally, and there's 3 people involved in that. This project is with Wally DM, and that is the magic item book for Shadowdark RPG. 500 plus items. Now, I had initially said let's do one for Shadowdark and for 5e. Wally said let's do Shadowdark first. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. So we'll do the Shadowdark version, and then later on maybe we do the 5e version, which I think the 5e version would be a year from now, like next year. But the Shadowdark version can happen this year because I've written most of it. I just need to pull it together. It needs to be organized. Wally needs to do a bit of magic with his layout. And he will have to, of course, source all of the art. There isn't going to be artwork for every single item. 500 items, never going to happen. But we can probably source the artwork for categories of magic items. There will still at least be descriptions of the magic items so that you know what they are, right? So what do I say to my players when they get this magic item? These magic items will be common in nature. Most of them will be low powered, commonish things that you don't have to worry too much about. They're not going to unsettle your game too much. And a lot of them will be very unusual. Some not, but quite a lot of them will be. For those of you who are aware, I spent a lot of time working on that, and that is a project I expect sometime just after the middle of this year. You're probably wondering, how can all of this happen? It's because a lot of it's already been written. It just needs to be compiled. Okay. The next project, I don't know if this is going to happen in 2026, but a lot of the work is already done. And that is a skill or adventure challenge book with about 12 plus non-combat scenarios to help dungeon masters with Shadowdark and Dungeons & Dragons 5e. They might be separated. I might make a sort of a skill or adventure challenge book for Shadowdark and one for 5e so that they're not crossing over each other, because they're not exactly the same thing, right? They do have differences. And for those of you who are aware of all of the skill challenge stuff I've done over the years, most of that is written. It is just about compiling it and finishing a few things off. I'm not going to promise it in 2006, but it might happen. You never know. I'm not going to say no. But that is certainly something I've been working on. That's a project that I expect will have most work done near the end of the year and be ready hopefully next year. Another thing that's going to be happening, and again, this has already had a lot of the tools made for it, and that is crafting non-player characters. So a crafting non-player characters book to allow dungeon masters to use a sort of a system agnostic tool set to make their NPCs. A lot of this has already been written and done. It's about compiling again. I don't know if it's going to get released in 2006, but it's probably going to wind up being in 2027 because most of it's done again. I'm working on a homebrew world building book for any system. Doesn't matter what system it is, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, Shadowdark, blah, 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 Mork book, won't matter in the slightest. Because I do so much world building and I build so many different worlds, I have a lot of tools, and I used to sort of run a class around this, and so I thought, well, let's incorporate that into a book. I think it's unlikely to be released this year, but I will do some of the work this year on it and at least collect all the bits and pieces up. And that's probably going to get released next year. Something that I've been working on for a while, and I've started doing a lot more work on it. You might see a version of this game this year because it is written. I don't know if it's in its final version though. It's version 11 so far. And this is a new tabletop role-playing game, and it's called Mazes and Monsters. I said when I was ready to do stuff, everything would come very quickly, and it is definitely going to come very quickly. This is basically Dungeons and Dragons light game for people, for kids who are either 4 or 5 upward to play. It is designed to be very much Dungeons and Dragons, a Dungeons and Dragons clone, but brought down to a level that a 4 or 5-year-old can play this game, can make a character and play the game. And it's called Mazes and Monsters, the RPG. That is the code name. The final name might change. I think I might get into trouble by calling it Mazes and Monsters. But that's its code name right now. It is on version 11. I'm in the process of play testing character building to make sure that that's going to work. Fortunately, I don't believe the playtesting around the game rules are going to be too much of a problem because of the nature of the game rules. And I'll explain more about that later. That might get released this year, at least in an alpha playtest form. Because, as I said, it's kind of already written, most of it anyway. And I keep refining it and keep adjusting it, and I've got some feedback on that right now. So in development, no time frame on it, but you might see the first version this year. And I am play testing it with 5-year-olds. If I can find a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old, that's what the key thing. I don't want this game to be a game that is 5.5. I don't want it to be Shadowdark. Shadowdark's too complicated. I don't want it to be basic D&D, Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Mork book, none of those. It's got to work for a 4 or 5-year-old to play. If it doesn't, it's fucking not going to be any good to me. I want to leave this world with a game that you can play with your kids when you're growing up as parents, rather than stop playing the game for 5 years while you wait for them to grow to the point where they're 12. Okay? It's too long. So there needs to be a game that can do that. And I don't believe that Hero Kids does that successfully. I think there's a better game that can be made. So that's what I want to try and do, and it's already in development. As I said, it is written. It's just about refining and testing a little bit before I start putting I don't want to put it out when it's too rough. I want to make sure that most of the things that need to be sorted out are done. Homebrew adventure building book with many Dungeon Master tools. I already have a lot of the assets for that. That's about pulling things together. I don't know that I think I'll pull the assets together this year, but I don't think it'll get published this year. I think that'll be next year. Improvising methods for tabletop role-playing games to help Dungeon Masters. Again, I have all the material. Pulling it together is the biggest issue. And then finding time in Wally's schedule and my schedule to get it out. Could happen this year, could happen next year. There are certain things that have to take priority, and this one is less important. And then lastly is creating tabletop role-playing game locations to help Dungeon Masters. Again, I have a lot of the assets, pulling it together, but the key things is the things that have to happen this year is I have to get the homebrew monster builder or creator out this year. Before the middle of the year, I think. I can get that done. because the tools are there. It's mostly done. So I'm fairly confident it can be sorted out. Have to get remastered backgrounds done this year. So I'm going to do that. So that's 1. 2, remastered species for Dungeons & Dragons 5e or 5.5 has to be this year. And remastered classes for D&D 5e or 5.5 has to be this year. There's 4 projects, as far as I'm concerned, that have to happen this year. A lot of the work is already done. It is just about pulling it together, refining stuff, getting to a point where I'm satisfied. And on the cherry on top would be getting the Shadowdark monster book out at the end of the year. I don't know if that'll happen. The Magic Item book, again, I think is probably going to definitely happen again because, as I said, the assets are already there. So there's 5 or 6 things that might wind up getting dumped onto the marketplace and DriveThru RPG this year from me. It's a lot. It's a lot. I know that sounds crazy, but as I said, I've written most of it. It's just about sort of pulling it together and syncing things up. Do you know what I mean? So, yeah. Going to be exciting. Going to be a bit scary, but going to be an exciting year for me in terms of publications. And yes, a lot of it you will be able to access for free. What do you got here, Fred Huber? I have always preferred modifying a base class to fit the concept the player has for their PC. It took me a couple of hours work between DM and player in an AD&D before 2E. Right, yeah. I don't think that subclasses are the solution, so I found a way to solve the problem of, being able to refine a class is an important aspect, whether it's for a player or the game master or dungeon master. So I built into the structure and the scaffolding a way of doing that I think is better than multi-classing and subclassing. And I'm going to show you how that works very shortly. Probably either next week or the week after, I would imagine. It's going to be in the next couple of weeks. You'll see the custom species and the custom class structure. And then I will start going through the sample and refining stuff. This keeps power creep under DM control, not something imposed to a seller book. Yeah, again, I'm not doing this because I need to make money off this. I don't actually have to do this at all. I could just go and look after my veggie garden and work out in the gym, do my exercise, watch some movies, chill out, enjoy myself. I don't have to do any of this stuff. But I do want to make sure that there are some things that you guys can use. Since I'm semi-retired, and since I don't make my income off this and don't care about that, I can do whatever the fuck I like, and I don't have to worry about somebody above me telling me how to do stuff. I can just do what makes sense that will work at a table for an analog game, not a digital game. Yep. I think HeroQuest is sort of the next stepping stone from your mazes and monsters, a more standardized combat versus the narrative for your game. Yes, you're right. So if any of you are aware of HeroQuest, HeroQuest is more complicated than mazes and monsters, mechanically. But mazes and monsters is far more customizable probably than any game you've ever come across, frankly. Yeah. That's the gist of what's happening for me this year. There's a lot of stuff, and yeah, 5 or 6 projects this year. Who would have expected? I know a lot of you have been waiting for me to get to that point where I would release a lot of stuff. I released 2 things last year. This year there's going to be 5 or 6. It's a lot. You brought HeroQuest for the figures, fair enough. Seems reasonable to me. Why not? They're good figures. Anyway, are you excited for Dungeons & Dragons or tabletop role-playing games in 2026? So, yes, 48%. I'm glad to hear it. I know a lot of people think that I am pessimistic and negative and so forth, but I'm really not. I just have to be real about things, and yeah. If somebody else won't fix it and design it, then I'll do it myself. No, 26%. Oh, that's kind of sad. Undecided, 17%. Just watching, 9% out of 23 votes. Okay, all right. Look, please don't freak out too much. I honestly think I'm going to lose my voice. I honestly think you'll be surprised how much is going to happen in 2026 that is going to be good. It might not come from the places or the people you're expecting, but I think you're going to see some really good stuff. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I understand. A lot of people are very concerned about what Wizards of the Coast is doing. I get it, but you don't have to rely on them. You can look at what other people are doing, and they may very well solve a lot of the problems you were really concerned about. Anyway, let's get out of here. This is me losing my voice, and I need to stop. So thank you for watching and listening. I do appreciate it. Thank you for taking part in the poll if you did. Thank you for the people in chat who commented and asked questions. Fred Huber, Prepare, Cook and Survive, Cal Rowell, we had Doc Flamingo, and I believe we also, was it Chris? We had Chris there. Chris Allen, that's right. Chris Allen was here as well. Look, thank you for your comments. I do appreciate it. And wherever you are in the world, and did I mention the poll? I think I did. Wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, or the night, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Stay positive. Trust me, there are good things coming in 2026. Absolutely going to happen. And you won't need to worry about figuring out how to be able to buy it because it will be readily available in some way digitally. A lot of stuff is going to go digital, so you won't have too many issues. And a lot of people are going to use print on demand. And print on demand, particularly through DriveThru RPG and other websites, can be done just about anywhere in the world now. Not everywhere, but pretty much everywhere. So all the best. So until next time, keep rolling those 20s.